It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Ronald Caplan Md, and the author of a book called Long Life, A Survival Strategy. A very interesting book and a very interesting gentleman. And Dr. Caplan, welcome very, very much to Conversations. Great pleasure to welcome you to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It is. And a book, I've had a chance to look at a lot of, in a survey way, the book, and it's very interesting. I would say to people in the audience, bear with me. I've got a bit of a cold, so I feel like I've got a frog or some ugly toad in my throat. But maybe I won't talk so much as I usually have a tendency to do. But welcome very, very much.
Thank you.
I wonder, maybe you could share your background a little bit, born and raised, education, and we'll get into the sub and substance of the book, and particularly the patterns that emerge, because I know it's a very, very interesting subject. But your own background, if you would, please.
Sure. I was born and bred in Montreal, Canada, where of course, I was educated in the public school system. Then when I went to McGill University, got myself a Bachelor of Science degree, followed by my medical degree, and then I went into postgraduate training in medicine, all at McGill University, where I did a residency in surgery, followed by a residency in obstetrics and gynecology.
Two separate residencies, is that?
Well, the way it worked, Dad, it varied from place to place, but the way it worked at McGill in those days was you needed a surgical background before you could go into obstetrics and gynecology.
Really?
So
interesting.
There were certain schools in the United States that did the same thing at the same time, namely Harvard was one. And after that, I went on the faculty of McGill University and had a private practice in Montreal, Canada, and saw the inception of universal health care in Canada.
You can talk to that then later in the program.
Yeah. Actually, I met Pierre Elliott Trudeau at the time, who was my member of Parliament and who put the thing in. After that, I came to the United States, came to Cornell University here in New York City, where we are today, of course, and I've been on the faculty of Cornell ever since. They now call me emeritus, and I have mixed feelings about being emeritus.
Well, it might leave you free to do some of those things you never had the time to do when you're so busy filling the job role.
Exactly. Like
it might be a liberating time. I wanted to think about that because we're going to be talking. It might be a very liberating stance. We ought to be encouraging people to do the things that they really want to do that don't necessarily fit in to the wage structure of the economy. That's something. There might be great life after retirement, much more than we tend to think.
That's one of the points I touch on in the book, and it's certainly one of the points I like to make, and it's certainly a life I try to lead myself, and namely that I don't think you should let your body or your mind go inactive at any stage of your life. And I think as long as you're healthy and can keep healthy, you should keep your mind and your body active. With a large concentration on your mind. And yes, after you're away from focusing every day on immediate needs of, say, your patients or whatever it may be, you can step back a little bit and look at the overall picture and sort of get an idea of how things perhaps should progress into the future.
Yeah, and it might be room for the life of the mind and the spirit beyond the immediate thing. Or if you take an analogy of somebody in, let's say you're a professional, somebody in an assembly line has to stand there 8 hours a day turning a nut on an assembly line, can be pretty deadening. A lot of the aspects of what people do in order to earn a living for the vast majority of people is not very fulfilling for an awful lot of people. It's just rote. And it's kind of deadening, I think. So after they get retired, as long as they got a source of income to live comfortably, they could be concerned with the world of the mind and the spirit, the works of civilization beyond just the works of what do they call it, goods and services production, that sort of thing. I think it would be good if we could get everybody retired to do what it is they want to do, maybe.
I think that would be ideal. I think a lot of these road jobs you're talking about are more and more being taken over by machines.
I believe so.
And I think every person, if they can, should certainly try to get as much as they can out of out of their work and have a sense of fulfillment. I know I always did, and I still do. And you'd say, well, that's because you're in a profession. I mean, you were an academic, so you sort of lived that same kind of life. But I know my grandfather was a cabinet maker.
Right.
And he took a great deal of pride in his work.
Oh, yeah, it's art form. It's
He's
art.
one of the few people I ever met in my life who could draw a straight line without a ruler.
Good for him. No, but woodworking and that sort of thing. Mr. Carter, after he retired, was doing woodwork.
So I think it's totally possible to get involved in things that give you a lot of fulfillment, and no matter what you're doing, to take pride in the excellence of the product that you're putting out there.
It also might be good if human beings could relate to one another. Like you make a wonderful quilt, or a woman or somebody make a beautiful thing, and then you wouldn't go and try and sell it to somebody. You would give it to them as a gift. And that's a different kind of exchange when you're not in the marketplace relationship, particularly with other human beings. It seems to me it would be good if we could be the burden of that kind of a relationship, bargaining back and forth with one another, rather than just being able to be comfortably leisured. They have an old term in the 19th century called, if you had a competence, if you had a significant amount of material, of income, I guess, ultimately, in order to lead and enjoy the comfortable life without your having to have it fit into some job role somewhere. That I think there's great hope after retirement. I've been retired for about 38 years, and I recommend it.
You're not really retired.
No,
neither am I, for that matter. And about what you're talking about, of course, we're now in an economic situation where what comes to the forefront is the economics. And people have to keep that on their minds, and they still have to earn a living. They have to earn their daily bread. And I think that we have this opposite problem, whereas people are living longer because of the strides we're making in medicine, as well as social strides that we're making, that people have the ability to live longer healthfully, that the burden of that leisure, if that's what it is not left to a few productive people who are younger age to support all these people. In other words, we should be capable of supporting ourselves as much as possible, I think.
Yeah, maybe we're going to have some new economic policy or policy grounding statements and thoughts about the way the society is going to be organized writ large. We may be going through a focusing event with this current thing with Mr. Paulson and everything, to where it may be the situation out of which we come, the historical condition, is not able to give us institutional structures or understanding that the future requires if we're going to prosper collectively as a human society within a larger ecological context. Some people see a kind of Gaia principle for the Earth as a kind of organism, that kind of thing. But it may be that it's a time of qualitative transformation, that maybe like Galileo or Copernicus, when they brought us into the solar system.
do think we're rethinking this from on both the nuts and bolts level and all the way up. And certainly the way the society is structured economically has to change. When Roosevelt came in with the New Deal, for example, and Social Security came in, there were a relatively large number of workers. I seem to remember 6 for every person who was going to retire, and the people who were going to retire weren't going to live very long. As a matter of fact, in those days, a lot of people did not live to retirement age, so the retirement burden wasn't that great. Nowadays, of course, as we go along and large numbers of people live longer and longer and longer.
And healthily.
Increasingly.
Hopefully.
It's not fair to place this undue burden upon a relatively small proportion of the population who are going to be working and providing the income for everybody. So we do have to rethink that.
Yes.
And I think arbitrary retirement age, for example, which has been sort of the thing in a lot of industries, notably, say, airline pilots, just to take something out of the blue.
Yeah, very good.
They have tend to have a specific retirement age. Now, it used to be that men used to get heart attacks and die in their 40s and their 50s, and of course there's this major shift in that for a lot of good medical reasons and lifestyle habit reasons. And there's probably not as much reason anymore if a pilot, man or woman, has all their facilities, both physical and mental, why they should have to retire at, say, some given age, 55 or even 65.
Right. Right.
And if you look at the supposedly most learned members of our society, if you look at judges, they go on forever, especially Supreme Court judges. And these people are interpreting the Constitution. These people are deciding every day how we should live our lives. It's hard to understand at an individual level how that comes back to you as a person, but it does.
Yeah, that's very well taken. And as you say, it's really good to keep the mind active.
Oh, sure.
I don't know how much of the there's an old saw, I'm not sure if it's true, that you only use something like 10% of our brain or something, but there's a great deal of capacity for the use of it, and if you don't use it, you lose it in a very real sense, like with muscles.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And we used to think, when I was a medical student, first of all, everything I learned as a medical student, except basic anatomy and things, has all changed. It's all gone through a massive revolution. And being fortunate enough to be on an academic staff, you tend to keep up with all the new things that are going on and even get to innovate a little yourself.
Okay.
But we used to think, for instance, that somebody reached their intellectual potential at, say, age 12, and after that a few of your brain cells died every day, and then they don't regenerate. This has turned out not to be true at all.
Completely so? Completely not true?
It's not true. Now, unless you get a degenerative brain disease like Alzheimer's or arteriosclerosis in the blood vessels that feed the brain, you could keep intellectualizing probably forever. There was a classic study done not too long ago on taxi drivers, for instance, in London, and these people are very schooled. They need to know the map of the city.
That city's hard to know.
Very hard. I mean, they don't number the streets like we do here. I moved to New York because they number the streets,
they number the avenues.
Directions
in Boston?
It's very tough.
Boston, you can't get there from here all the time you hear when you get that, but it's like a spaghetti city.
So they tested these London taxi drivers, and they found out that they could keep their expertise for a very, very long time. There was no real outside limit on it, and just by keeping your mind active.
And just encompass that new suburban outlier to the end of the, outside the village wall or something.
What you certainly don't want to do as an individual is say, okay, I'm retired and now I'm going to go someplace and, just vegetate and maybe do a little shuffleboard or something. I mean, this is not, warehousing of older people is not something we believe in anymore, if we ever did.
Well, what about this idea? We were talking before, and it's good you mentioned Trudeau and we want to talk about health care and that sort of thing, obviously, but this idea that you're going to have people retired, and people relate, and you use the word work. There's two words. You could have a job. A job is something like Job. But a job is something that you get money for what you do. That's what in people's mind. That's the way you get income to buy milk and bread and cake on Sunday, maybe once in a while, that kind of thing. That's the thing. That's one thing. The other, work, and that's the one that's given such tremendous value. Mr. Obama, as progressive as he is saying, we're going to create jobs for people. That's a way to distribute income to them through their labor participation. But the actual production is increasingly like a combine in Kansas. It goes across the field. They don't even have a driver in it now. It's technology. And the technology is all very narrowly owned by a very small class of people. And maybe 10% own the assets in any real effective way. But then the idea that work is something that you're going to do because it's something that you are interested in, like a painter at his easel, when he's really working, when he's really going, or a writer when they're really hunting down an idea or something, they're good. They're motivated by their work, something that they're doing. Like Mr. Van Gogh painted those irises. He wasn't on commission. I mean, he was concerned with it, but he was engaged by his own curiosity and his own initiative, and that's the most valuable thing. Seems to me as part of the human consciousness. If you look at a 5-year-old or something, they're interested in everything, and they're learning like crazy, and they're very curious, and they're very gorgeous. And somehow that goes down, that creativity goes down after the age 5. I'm told there's studies that show that a creative state of mind, one where you're self-motivated and interested, goes down after about 5.
Well,
after they start coming into our conditioning institutions.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. A lot of that is because it's being stifled.
That's
They're
what
told
I'm saying,
that it's not right to ask about this or to act in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is exactly what you say. It's the conditioning process. So just as our minds can keep expanding after the age of 12, and our brain cells, in fact, don't die and can regenerate, you can have an educational system in which you don't stifle a child.
Yeah.
I think that goes without saying.
But that may be something that may be in the offing now. We have this wonderful internet. I mean, if you have a computer, you got access to, it's incredible. It's incredible to me that you can do research on everything in the world. You can be into the greatest minds and the greatest institutions, and it's just getting started in terms of having that available to you.
Well, it's interesting it's interesting because, you know, when television first came out, for example, they used to tell kids that don't spend too much time in front of the television, it's not good. And when video games came out, they used to tell kids, don't spend too much time with the video games because that's no good. And don't spend too much time with your internet because you might see things that you're not supposed to see at some arbitrary given age, which I don't really ascribe to. And we keep putting these stops on people and their creativity, and I don't think we should be doing that.
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan said we enjoy our museums where we display a way of life that we in our technology is rendering impossible. You know, or we drive into the future with our eye on the rearview mirror, and people are ensconced in institutions coming out of history, and also a sense of practicalness. Practicality says you will toe the line, and you will do. And much of the educational process is teaching children to relate to an authority figure, so that they will fit into a corporate world where you have a senior vice president, you do what the senior vice, you know, that kind of thing, or to a military model. And it's not really one that is in. I used to try and explain as an enlisted man when I was in the Army to the sergeants, we could do things more democratically. They didn't want to hear it at all.
Right?
You know?
No.
But you understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, it's not only that. I mean, you could take it to any level. For instance, to me, when I was a little child, there's something now called attention deficit disorder.
They call it that,
I think when I was a little kid, if they had this diagnosis, maybe I would have been that.
Yes.
Because I cannot sit through an hour lecture at a university. I fall asleep or I leave. You know, somebody has to be intensely interesting that you can listen to them for that length of time. And to me, I've always been able to accumulate information a lot quicker myself by reading it myself, or as you say, seeing it on the internet, or something of that matter, rather than sitting and listening to somebody lecture at me for an hour. I always felt like saying at the beginning of the lecture, when they started with the slides, give me your slides. I could look at your slides in 30 seconds, and then if I need to review them later, I could do that too. And
I think that's the direction consciousness is going with the youth, I believe. I think they're going with that. And also, you're running it down like a hound dog after a fox. If you're really interested in something, you'll go after it and you'll find. That's creative, you know. And that's what's to be safeguarded in the educational process, rather than treating people like quarry slaves that have to do what they're told. Responsibility is do what you're told, do it this way. And there's so much of the education is geared toward that control freak mentality that is so characteristic of the institutions that interrelate society, and that may all have to change to accommodate really truly independent people who are comfortably leisured, might be the promise of the time of which we're coming into, so that they can do what it, and then keep that alive, that learning process lifelong.
Well, we would certainly hope so.
Yeah.
You know, there's certain things that you're taught, like now in medicine, for instance, we're into something called evidence-based medicine.
Okay.
It's not just what the doctor tells you.
Mm-hmm.
It's, can the doctor back it up?
Yeah.
Does this really work?
Okay.
If you do studies on it. You know, when I was in school, people used to tell me, well, if you're having an exam, what you do is you're supposed to go to bed the night before and have a good night's sleep. And you're not supposed to study all night.
Yeah.
I always used to study all night.
Yeah.
And you get to a point, if you really get into a topic that you're interested in, where suddenly it just seems to come at you.
Yeah.
And you start to bring in the information in a way that is interesting to you and that you'll remember. And that worked for me. Now, it may not work for other people. And what I'm saying is you can't advocate that everybody's in a cookie-cutter kind of a system,
Right.
especially if they have some element of creativity to them.
And it seems to me all the 5-year-olds are just creative. They're my favorite human beings, I think. They are so honest, have no artifice, and they're just curious about everything. Anyway, that's a thing. Now, you studied, you Mr. Trudeau, in the system of health, and you've written a very interesting book, Long Life. You're doing research along those lines after long, medical work and so forth. So what about, maybe we could talk about, that's a huge issue in the world, in the United States, healthcare. Maybe we could talk some about you having been familiar with the Canadian single-payer system and so forth.
Right.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about how can we get to, what are the dimensions of the healthcare problem, and then how can we get to a system that is beneficial, and then we got to get to your book, okay?
Right.
But could you talk to some of those things?
There's basically two conflicting things going on, and we somehow have to get these two things into sync. And one is that everybody needs health care in our society, and right now everybody isn't getting even a basic level of health care. The number that goes around is that there are 47 million people in our society that don't have access to health care economically. In other words, they're not insured in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So that's a lot of people.
It sure is.
And there's various variations, deviations on this number, but it's around there somewhere. And we're spending, as a society, believe it or not, about $2 trillion a year on all forms of medical care.
Have you been in the United States long enough to remember Evan Dirksen?
Of course.
Ev Dirksen, the Evan Charlie show. Ev
Right.
Dirksen, he had that accent, and he used to say, $1 billion here and $1 billion there finally adds up to real money. Trillions of dollars are involved. 25% of the national product is projected for, and so forth. But yeah, okay.
So when you're talking, because of everything that's going on economically now, when you shoot out a number like $2 trillion, people start to understand what you mean. The American system, a trillion is 1,000 billion, and a billion is 1,000 million, and that's a lot of money. As a matter of fact, the amount of money we spend on medical care in this country a year is more than the gross national product of most countries.
Staggering,
And that's because we're a highly evolved society. There's nothing really wrong with that, and because we value the life of the individual, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that from my perspective. So at the same time that all this is going on, this need, this economic need, At the same time, there's this burgeoning medical science, which is getting down to a molecular level and beyond, which is allowing us actually not just to make people look good or diet right or exercise right, but to actually prolong life.
Okay.
And this goes under the heading of preventive medicine. Now, unfortunately, what most people think of as preventive medicine is not really preventive medicine. In other words, the onus is put back on the individual. You say to a person, well, if you eat right, and you don't eat too much, and you eat the right things, and you get enough sleep, and you exercise adequately in an aerobic fashion, not in a destructive fashion, and you don't do high behaviors that will get you into trouble. You know,
stay out of jail.
Good idea.
Oh, I don't. Maybe that's the wrong.
Try not to jump off a cliff, something like that, right? And you do all those things, then you're going to live long and happily. Well, that's a part of it. That's a piece of it. The piece we're bringing to the table is real preventive medicine. And what does real preventive medicine mean? We all get disease sooner or later. If you stick around long enough, you're going to get sick, okay? And what we really mean by preventive medicine is finding disease extremely, extremely early, when it can be easily treated, and developing those treatments that are targeted, that go strictly to the disease process, and get rid of the disease or ameliorate the disease without killing the individual, without damaging the person. So if you could do that, people could live indefinitely, and you can, even if you can't cure disease, you can change a life-threatening disease into some chronic condition that somebody could comfortably live with.
Staggeringly important.
Right.
And these are developments that are coming through our knowledge base and so forth.
And a lot of them are already in operation. Now, the problem is that contrary to political and popular belief, these things are extraordinarily expensive, especially when you start a new technology.
Wait a minute, is it the belief that they're extraordinarily expensive, or is that contrary to the reality? They need not be extraordinarily expensive.
Well, they need
how
not
do you deal
be.
With it?
Well, okay. They are expensive at inception.
Research level,
the research and development to bring them to the table, and the prototypical treatment or diagnostic parameter is such that it is expensive at the outset. It's as if you built somebody a Maserati, right? You say, okay, I want a new car, and you go to Italy and you get the thing hand-built. It's going to cost a fortune.
Your prototypes always are.
Right. And they don't work too well.
Right.
Your Maserati's going to break down. When I first came here, it was the beginnings of laparoscopic surgery. We brought it, I had it in Canada, we brought it here. And it was this old thing that, you know, your horse could run faster than my train. And it's true up to a point. You know, we've had horses for I don't know how long. People have been riding horses. When trains first came out, of course, by the time you get the thing to chug along, you know, somebody's going to beat you with this horse. And when we first started minimally invasive surgery, we used to hear things from established surgeons like, you're peering through a keyhole. You're always like a peeping Tom. Why look in the abdomen through a little thing
when you just cut the cavity open?
Cut the thing open, which I could do in 42 seconds.
Just give me a Black & Decker saw.
Exactly, which is what they were doing. And of course these were accomplished surgeons, and of course they could use that modality, which we knew well, faster than you could set up some cumbersome new equipment that came out of Germany, and the writing on it wasn't even in English. It looked like something out of an old U-boat.
Those Germans did come up with a lot of research, didn't they?
And till you got the thing functioning. Well, of course now, if you look at it from the perspective of time, in the year 2008, these techniques are so advanced, we don't even look at the patient anymore. Everything is up on a television monitor, right? And aside from the insertion of a few small instruments, you're operating looking at a television monitor.
You could be operating. Could that be extended to where you could have it the actual procedure being done at a different geographical location on
It's
the
already being done, which
so you
is
could have the surgeon in
that's the next
Tokyo and
level.
the patient in New York?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The way
that's
it
a big
works
development.
now is if you have a very, very accomplished surgeon, say in a very specific technique, and that surgeon's in one place, you don't have to bring that surgeon to the patient. You could have surgeons on site putting in the instruments, and then through robotics, which is now available, have the surgeon sitting at the console, at the robotic console, and monitoring these instruments and doing surgery in a very fine way, because even the tremor, even though it's not visible in a surgeon's hand, could be enough to change the way that you do surgery, or the width of your finger. These instruments are so fine, and they're robotically controlled, and the computer's making allowances for everything. It's just like you land a 747. Nobody lands a 747. A computer lands a 747.
That's amazing.
So you
interesting.
do have this ability now, and we have moved from minimally invasive surgery into robotics, but the machines, you know, if you want to put a robotic machine in a given hospital, it's way over $1 million just for this one console. And of course it needs all the support techs and the people to keep it happy, and you know, the things are always little glitches that need to be fixed and fine-tuned all the time.
I seem to get them all the time on my home computer, but go ahead.
Well, I have somebody on call for the glitches in my home computer, so you can imagine for something like that, you know, you need the technical support, you need the company behind you, right? And then you need the very, very skilled surgeon who knows how to use it. And talking about, for instance, operating off a television monitor. Well, a television monitor is two-dimensional. You get width, and you have length. Now
holography's coming.
The depth is trained. So that's why you need a surgeon sitting at the console. That's why you need what I mentioned briefly before, this basic anatomic knowledge. I know when I see an image on a screen of somebody's inside their abdominal cavity, for example, which is where I'm used to operating, that I know where these structures are in space, because I have done it so many times, and I've been so trained that you automatically know where everything is, but the image you're getting is two-dimensional. The next breakthrough, of course, is something like holography, where the surgeon will actually be able to see where these things really are. His depth perception, he won't have to be learned, it'll be there.
I've heard tell that there are certain aspects to certain brain surgery that is not even done by a human being.
Well, it's robotics.
It is so calibrated and so, I don't know, you know, programmed or something, that it's safer to do it with just a robotic computer program. And the surgeon is not actually perceiving it, and they won't allow him because it's so delicate, and like the shaking of the hand.
Well, the surgeon is...
Or, if I may, one other thing along that line, that they got triple redundancy systems for that airlines would be more efficient and safer if there was no pilot in the pilot seat, and it was done with triple redundancy computer programs. The airline industry would be more efficient and safer if there were no pilots.
Well,
that's carrying it to an extreme, but it seems to be the case.
It is the extreme, but it is, you could say that the pilot, the human being, the very trained pilot or the very trained surgeon is the ultimate redundancy. It's when everything else fails, you need that person.
And you got to have that override in case it does.
Exactly. So that's really the function, becomes the function of that highly professional person.
Why don't we just build another level of redundancy into the computer programming, a fourth level, so we won't need that surgeon at all, and he can go play shuffleboard in the sun in Florida.
Well,
you understand? What I'm saying is that's going to apply to assembly lines, that's going to apply to retailing, it's going to apply to everything. And
we may well
the technology is going to displace human beings in the production of goods and services, and increasingly in the realizing of the mind and the spirit.
I agree with you.
Some people are Luddite in thinking that, you know, You know what I'm saying?
I think we will get there.
Yeah, we
but
may
we're
be
nowhere near there yet.
You don't think so? You don't think the current meltdown and the labor theory of value and the Employment Act of 1946, which embodies our basic grounding policy statement economically, we're going to distribute income by jobs. Income is going to get to the folks by the fact that they have a job. And that's how there's going to be market ability to clear the market of what can be produced. And there's a massive, and Lord Keynes said in 1930 that we're going to be confronted with massively technologically induced massive unemployment, and 95% of the people, the only way they have to get money to go into a store and buy bread is to have a job, which could become a redundancy pattern within a cyber program. Sorry. And what are we going to do about the common cold, I'd like to know. Just a couple of questions that maybe those things are being
That's
forced
what they used
upon
to
us.
call a multi-part question. To get to the most acute thing first, the common cold is a hard one because there's a multiplicity of viruses that can cause it.
I seem to have run into them in the air somewhere, yeah. But
personally, I take a flu shot every year, which gets rid of some of the worst ones.
I've done that, but I still got this nagging thing. I'm looking forward to some honey and tea or something.
There is supposedly colds are self-limited and they last 3 days, but they generally tend to last longer.
Okay.
And
go home, take 2 aspirin, and go to bed.
That's probably still the
Doc.
same old
Okay.
advice.
We got that, but answer the question about the redundancy of pilots and so forth.
Now,
or technological displacement of labor in the productive process.
I think for the immediate term, the near term, it's a re-education process. People need more and more education to do more and more sophisticated work, while the robots do the robotic work. And I think that's where we are as a society. Where we're going to end up ultimately, you're probably right, but I don't think it's going to be very, very soon.
With due respect, I think within the huge institutional structure of the economy of the United States, most of the functions are robotic for most of the people. About half the population is standing at a cash register, checking payments that people are making, which could be easy passed. And the things that people do in order to earn money,
right,
within a corporate structure, cubicle corporate structure, is not fulfilling. It's just, it seems to me, it's not. I mean, the really creative things are pretty rare in those. I mean, it just seems to me the overall thing, you know, the things that it's like serfs on a feudal estate. And the assets are all owned by a tiny group, maybe 20%, live the life of the mind and spirit and real interesting, and everybody else is picking up leaves on the estate of the people who own all the technological and capital instruments that constitute that area, and so it's ever been since the emperors of Rome. Well, it seems to me. And they say that's all they know how to. It's sort of like slavery. The Marxists call it wage slavery.
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is, well, first of all, to get to the business, I'm no economist.
No, I know, yeah.
God forbid,
We're all economists now with this economic meltdown.
But it seems to me that all the major corporations have extremely wide ownership through the society, and they're owned by the shareholders. Now, the people who run them, that's a different story.
Well, I don't, it's an inch deep. It's an inch deep. It's not. It's all the assets.
It used
are
to
all
be an
owned by
inch deep, but the assets are now owned by things. If you really look at it,
mutual funds.
They're owned by teachers' pensions funds and workers' pensions funds, and those are the major stockholders in a vast majority of at least American enterprise, North American enterprise. So we're all stakeholders, and that's why when there's an economic collapse. Or the possibility of an economic collapse, we're all in such danger because our retirements, which is what we started talking about, are in horrific danger because all these pension funds, which are run by all these people who are trained economically or trained in business, whatever they're trained in, they've invested in the economy, into everything we're talking about. And now everybody who's ever worked at anything in any kind of organized way has their whole future and their ability to get bread invested in these funds, which are now at risk in an economic meltdown.
All the 401ks and so forth.
Exactly. So these are the major. When businessmen today go out to start a new company, this is the first place they go. They know where the money is. The money is in the major funds, and the major funds are very often pension funds.
Yeah, they are indeed. There's a lot of that's paid into that. And we got Social Security. But that's far afield in a sense. We were talking about the technology, and that's another way. I personally think we're going to need a new economic system other than the labor theory of value by which people contribute, but that's another issue. But you're talking about extending life. You're talking about the technology and that we can extend. Is there any chance we could, through our knowledge, reverse the aging process or deal with the aging process at a cellular level? I used to read Lewis Thomas, The Lives of a Cell. It was a great book. And so could we ever reverse the aging process itself? Or is that a dream?
We can certainly stop it, and it's not a dream.
Okay.
You can make cell lines immortal. And
Could you explain that? Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. At the end of each chromosome is something called a telomere.
Yes.
And this has to do with programmed cell death. And there's an enzyme, which is an organic catalyst called telomerase, which tends to this telomere. And by dealing with that, you can create a situation where a cell can become immortal. Now, like everything else, that's a two-edged sword.
Right.
You could stop the telomere, in other words, from shortening and eventually a cell from dying. But it's a two-edged sword because one of the hallmarks of cancer is cells that just go amok and keep dividing and dividing and dividing until they kill the host, namely the person.
Yes.
So you have to be very, very careful with what you do with this.
Yes.
And yes, from a cellular level, we can make cells immortal.
But isn't there a constant recycling of that in the thing? There's something like 100 trillion cells in a human organism?
There's a lot of cells. Cells are microscopic. You can't see a cell except through under a microscope.
I hear tell 100 trillion.
That's a lot of cells.
And they're all overlaid with DNA as a template system, and every cell matters.
Well, every cell we think matters, and yes, they die, and yes, some of them are replaced, and some of them are not, depending on organ specialization. Now, one of the subjects here that we get into is stem cells.
Yes.
In other words, if somebody has organ failure. I was in on the early days of organ transplantation.
Okay, good for you.
And of course, the only organ transplantation that works without rejection is from identical twins, because identical twins are clones. So the original organ transplantation was done when there were identical twins, and one twin had a sick, dying organ, and the other twin had an extra organ, a kidney, which they could donate to that first twin. Now, the chances of that happening in the human population are pretty rare. So then we got into the whole field of how do you prevent organ rejection, and that has now been brought to a level. I was only on it peripherally because as a gynecologist, I happened to deliver the first baby ever born to a woman who had a non-related donor kidney.
Okay.
And that's how I sort of got into it. Now, what happens here is that with all the organs that are being transplanted now, kidneys, hearts, lungs, number one, you have to have a donor. namely somebody, usually somebody who's been killed but is not quite dead yet, and they've given consent to give their organs.
Yeah, that should be encouraged.
Right, and then and then organs get transplanted, and then the science of damping down rejection is gotten to a high level, so that people could live pretty well with a donated heart, a donated kidney, things of that nature.
What happens?
But
like
now,
go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
we've come to a whole other level.
Yeah.
Like, how do you just get rid of the whole thing? And how you get rid of the whole thing is by creating new organs.
The rejection, you mean?
Yeah, you just create new organs.
What
In other words,
what about things like the Jarvik heart that is artificial?
well, the Jarvik
rejection?
artificial heart was a prototype, and it was a good prototype. And there are artificial hearts, but they've never gotten to a point where they can really replace a real functioning human heart.
They use pig?
We use a lot of pig valves.
Okay, valves, right? Yeah.
And but because it's got to do with the vascularity of a valve and how much rejection you're actually going to get in a valve as opposed to a whole organ. But the breakthrough now is to make new organs out of stem cells. Stem cells are unspecialized cells. When a human embryo is formed, it's all stem cells. It's all potential.
Right.
These are totally potential cells. They could go any way. They could specialize into any organ. So you take stem cells and you get them to specialize
by genetic engineering.
Yeah, you get them, and then that cell. You could actually get to a point where you could put it on a template. Like right now, for instance, you could get stem cells and make an artificial esophagus.
No fooling.
Right.
How do you do that? How is that
you
done?
just get the...
No, how do you... I mean, you don't exactly have a...
Well, you could either get a stem cell from an embryo, but that has a whole lot of ethical baggage, okay? But we're now able to get stem cells from adult human cells of certain types. So if you can do that and then get it changed into, say, an esophageal cell.
How do you get it changed?
That's
is there research in that? It's genetic.
Yes,
this is biogenetics.
That's exactly right.
That's
you have to genetically engineer it and coax it into that path.
And we're making progress there?
Well, it's all being done.
Yeah.
And then you get that cell to go over a template, and it organizes itself into basically a new esophagus. And that person will not reject that esophagus because it comes from their own stem cell.
Amazing.
It's part of them naturally. Now, there's an interesting thing. One of the interesting things about this is, for instance, people with leukemia of various types, okay? That's a cancer of the blood.
Yes.
Now, the way you treat a person like that is, if successfully, is you basically take out all their white cells, right?
Yeah.
And you give them back a transplant. Okay, but it has to be from a totally matched donor. So there are banks of donors. There are people who will give bone marrow, just altruistically, just the same way people give blood. And these people are all over the world, and they're tissue matched.
Yeah.
Now, say you're unfortunate enough to get this particular disease, they go through the banking and they find you this match, and that's maybe somebody in Africa or Europe or somebody else who just happens by the odds to match you.
And we've got databases that contain this kind
right, and you get a bone marrow transplant from that person. Now again, no matter how big is your database, chances are you're not going to get what you want exactly for that person.
Okay.
But when a baby is born, there's umbilical cord blood, when you clamp the umbilical cord.
Yes.
Now you could take from that baby's umbilical cord, when you clamp the cord, a sample, it's from the placenta anyway, not going to use it, save it, freeze it. Now if that baby,
for that baby it would be
if that baby ever gets leukemia, those stem cells in that cord blood can be used to reconstitute their blood.
That could become part of a procedure that
This
would be
people are parents,
routinized. It
parents,
could become routinized.
of course, people are doing that right now.
Okay.
There are, if you're a parent, you have the option when your baby is born in this country to have a sample of that baby's blood stored for its own use in the eventuality that that baby will need those blood.
Cryogenics.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, there's problems with all these
yes,
things.
Of course.
Technology is
and a lot of them
perfect.
are prototypical, like you said. It's like
exactly.
getting that
now,
railroad. Yeah.
Probably that blood is not good for more than 15 years.
You mean in the frozen state?
Right.
Why?
For technical reasons. Now, obviously, there should be.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's as far as I could go with this particular thing. But
okay.
Assuming you could get it to go longer and longer, that would be good, because what happens if that person gets leukemia when they're 40?
And if we could just lay this down in terms of a thing that just is procedurally done almost autonomically when you're having a baby born.
Right.
It would just happen like.
Now, this takes us to. It's jumping a little bit, but for a segue, you know, into
we got
when
about
you talk
7 minutes left, so let's get the pattern.
Right.
Okay.
For instance, like, how do you wrap the economics around these huge medical advances?
Right.
And you have to decide as a society what's important. I remember when Papa Niccolo, who was at my hospital before I was there.
I'm sorry, I don't know who that is.
Invented the pap smear
for
women, right?
Okay. Huh.
And everybody said, this is ridiculous. You're going to smear every woman in the society, get a smear of her cells from her cervix to see whether or not she might get cancer of the cervix. This is ridiculous, and it's going to cost a fortune. Well, now we do it, and we've been doing it for, what, 50 years or more?
It's been around forever.
And this is just something we do.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And it costs, say, $7 or $10 a person every time they do it, and for all the women in the United States. Now, we don't consider this a cost. It's something that is done.
Prophylactic,
Now, the fact that this particular technology has been superseded, and we now know that cancer of the cervix is caused by a virus called human papillomavirus, and we could actually get DNA typing of that particular virus. And
does that render the pap smear obsolete?
It probably does.
Okay, that's interesting. That's what happens. Technology
but the problem is
that pilot's obsolete in the cockpit of an airplane with triple redundancy or quadruple redundancy patterns.
So a lot of women now are getting both these tests. The DNA probe for HPV virus is more expensive. Why? Well, it's a more elegant test, but it's also because it's being done on a few women as opposed to be done on everybody. Maybe we could get it down to the same $10 if it was done across the board.
And we get it down to 10 cents.
Or maybe
you know what I'm saying? Those things can happen, economies of scale. And that's something that could happen in healthcare.
And then just to follow that along, we now have a vaccine which we could give to young girls to prevent them ever getting the disease in the first place.
Wonderful. That's something that could be done routinely again. We could have
there's a lot of controversy about it. Because, again, it becomes a mindset. People have a mindset. Like, if you tell a woman who has a couple, they have a baby, and they bring this baby to the pediatrician says, well, this child needs his or her shots. And they say, fine, doctor, give my baby the shots. And we
do that with dogs.
Yeah, and we immunize them against diphtheria and tetanus and all these other things that we immunize little children against so they don't get all these horrible childhood diseases. That they used to get in the bad old days or the good old days or whatever they were.
They were bad. And history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken, said James Joyce. Right. So, and I wouldn't want to live in an age without anesthetic.
Exactly. So that's where that is. But when you talk about giving a girl a vaccine that will prevent her from getting a sexually transmitted illness, namely human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted disease, then people start raising all kinds of objections that if I give my daughter this, she'll have license to do whatever. Which
it's Gilbert and Sullivan stuff. I mean, not Gilbert. It's just it's a
but
human
it's the
condition.
Kind of thing, exactly.
It's a time of transition to a new way of thinking.
Exactly.
And it also is long life. is that the life expect. My father died in his 48th birthday, was buried, 49th, and that was the average age for a male at that time, born in 1899. Now I think it's 78, and it's growing. What is the average age you think is going to be extended out? We can live longer, long life. Your book is a thrust of that.
Probably.
On a large pattern of world sociological scene. We only got a couple minutes
left. In the
left.
best of the world,
we have to have
130 or so.
130.
Some people say 125.
Really?
The oldest people walking around today are probably 112 or so.
Yeah.
There's somebody I think lived to 120,
yeah.
documented. And
123 in France. Was
see, you're way ahead of me.
No.
And then
she gave up smoking cigarettes at 120 for her health.
There's a genetic aspect to some of these things.
Yeah.
And about 100 years ago, someone in the United States said they would defy us to find anybody in our society who lived to be 100, documented.
Yeah.
And now we have almost 100,000 women walking around who are 100 or older, and a certain number of men, much less than that, who are doing the exact same thing.
But we are going to, is there a chance we could reach immortality?
Immortality, that's a whole other question.
We only got a couple of seconds left. I want to show
theoretically, yes.
You know, that we could do it. Ray Kurzweil, I mentioned to you, he's a cyber person. Let's show the book, if you could, on camera, and I'll hold it until you can get it up. I want people to see it. It's in the bookstores now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's also on the internet.
Uh-huh.
Amazon.com.
Okay, it looks like we're going to have a hard time doing it, but it is Long Life, a Survival Strategy, by our guest, who is a very fine gentleman, as you've been able to see, Ronald M. Caplan, Caplan Md, MD. And thank you, Ronald Caplan, for coming in for all this.
Thank you so very much.
Very well-led life that continues, and may you prosper in your emeritus status beyond even what you accomplished when you were not. You were pre-emeritus, if I may say so.
Thank you. It's great being with you.
Thank you for coming in. It's just we ought to try and do more, and maybe you'd like to think about doing a program over here. I'll talk to you after
I
we
would
get on
love to.
camera.
Thank you.
Your pleasure to have his perceptions. We encourage you to get the book, and we're coming back again tomorrow, so please tune in. Ronald Caplan, thank you very, very much. Terribly interesting. We could go on talking for hours.
Thanks again.
My pleasure. See you tomorrow. So we're still chatting here and everything, and it was really interesting. Just hit the stride, really.
Right.
And I'm only hitting.
You could really talk about this stuff forever.
Oh, I do. I think so. It's really interesting. Yeah.
It's pretty basic.
You're with the Sanford Weill Center.
That's right.
Yeah, he was Citigroup. Yeah.
Yeah.
We did a program with him way back.
He put together that whole thing, and right now it's in crisis mode.
What is?
Citigroup.
Yeah. The whole economy is. It's focusing of everything, isn't it? Because so many things are predicated on the economy.
The giants who really got, you know.